Lena had always been close to her great-uncle Jacob. From her earliest memories, she recalled his gentle voice reading her stories from his vast collection of books. His presence was a constant, a comforting figure in her otherwise tumultuous childhood. He was a peculiar man, a recluse who lived in a sprawling estate miles from civilization. The mansion, with its towering spires and darkened windows, seemed to hold secrets of its own, secrets that Jacob never shared with anyone. He never married, and his only companions were the countless books that lined the shelves of his study. Each book was a world he could escape into, a world where he could find solace from the loneliness that seemed to envelop him. When Lena received news of his death, a wave of sadness washed over her. She remembered the last time she saw him, frail and tired, yet his eyes still sparkled with the same warmth and wisdom she had always known. It was a lonely death, just as he had lived his life. The thought of him passing away in that vast empty mansion filled her with a deep sense of sorrow and regret. The reading of the will brought a surprise. Lena was to inherit the estate. The lawyer's voice echoed in the dimly lit room, each word sinking in slowly as she tried to comprehend the magnitude of the inheritance. It was a strange bequest. She barely knew her great-uncle, and the thought of living in that isolated house sent shivers down her spine. The mansion, with its eerie presence, seemed to call out to her, beckoning her to uncover its secrets. The estate was known to be haunted, a rumor whispered in hushed tones by the locals. Stories of ghostly apparitions and unexplained noises had circulated for years, adding to the mansion's mystique. Lena, a woman of science and logic, dismissed such tales as superstitious nonsense. She prided herself on her rationality, her ability to separate fact from fiction, yet a seed of unease had been planted in her mind. Despite her logical reasoning, she couldn't shake off the feeling that there was something more to the stories, something that defied explanation. Despite her apprehensions, Lena decided to visit the estate. She felt a sense of duty, a need to honor her great-uncle's memory by seeing the place he had cherished so much. It was a long drive, the road winding through dense forest that seemed to swallow the sunlight. The further she drove, the more isolated she felt, as if she was leaving the world she knew behind. As she neared her destination, the forest grew denser, the air heavier. The trees seemed to close in around her, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sky. The trees loomed over the road, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers, casting long, eerie shadows that danced in the fading light. The atmosphere grew more oppressive with each passing mile, and Lena couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. She wondered what awaited her at the end of this journey, what secrets the mansion held, and whether she was truly prepared to face them. The estate was more imposing than Lena could have imagined. It loomed over her, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out and envelop her in their cold embrace. The mansion stood as a testament to a bygone era, its grandeur now faded but still palpable. The Victorian mansion stood at the end of a long gravel driveway, a path that seemed to lead not just to a house, but to another world entirely. Each crunch of gravel under her feet echoed in the stillness, amplifying the sense of isolation that surrounded her. Its silhouette stark against the darkening sky, the mansion appeared almost spectral, as if it were a ghost of its former self. The clouds above churned and twisted, adding to the ominous atmosphere that seemed to cling to the very air. Its once bright facade was now weathered and grey, consumed by creeping ivy. The ivy twisted and turned, snaking its way up the walls as if trying to reclaim the structure for nature. It was a living, breathing entity, slowly suffocating the life out of the mansion. The windows, dark and vacant, stared back at her like the eyes of a blind man. They seemed to hold secrets, stories of the past that were just out of reach. Each window was a portal to another time, a silent witness to the passage of years. A shiver ran down her spine as she stepped out of her car. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for her next move. She felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity, a pull that she couldn't quite explain. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the wind. It was a silence that seemed to press in on her, making her acutely aware of every sound, every movement. The trees swayed gently, their leaves whispering secrets to one another. It was the silence of a place long forgotten, a place that had been left to its own devices for far too long. The air was thick with the weight of abandonment, a palpable sense of neglect that seemed to seep into her very bones, a silence that seemed to hum with unseen energy, as if the very walls were alive with the memories of those who had once walked its halls. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a silence that was both comforting and unsettling. As she made her way up the creaking porch steps, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last, a reminder of her intrusion into this forgotten world. She paused for a moment, listening, but heard nothing but the sound of her own breathing. The heavy oak door groaned in protest as she pushed it open, its sound echoing through the silent house. It was as if the house itself was reluctant to let her in, as if it were guarding its secrets jealously. The door finally gave way, revealing the dim interior. Its sound echoing through the silent house, the door's creak seemed to awaken something within the walls. The emptiness was almost tangible, a void that seemed to swallow up the light and sound. She stepped inside, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that covered the floor. The air inside was stale and musty, thick with the scent of decay and the weight of forgotten memories. It was a smell that spoke of years of neglect, of a place that had been left to rot. The walls seemed to close in on her, the air heavy with the past. Dust motes danced in the faint rays of sunlight that pierced through the grimy windows, creating a surreal, almost magical atmosphere. The light seemed to bring the room to life, if only for a moment, illuminating the dusty furniture and cobweb-draped chandeliers. The sunlight revealed the true extent of the house's decay. Each piece of furniture was a relic, a reminder of a time when the house had been full of life and laughter. Now they were just ghosts, echoes of the past. The house felt cold, not just in temperature, but in its very essence. It was a coldness that seemed to seep into her soul, a chill that went beyond the physical. It was the coldness of a place that had been abandoned, left to wither and die. It was the coldness of a place devoid of human warmth, a place that had been forgotten by time. The walls seemed to whisper of the lives that had once been lived here, of the joys and sorrows that had played out within these rooms. A place where time seemed to stand still, where the past and present coexisted in a delicate balance. It was a place that held its breath, waiting for someone to come and breathe life back into it. Lena took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead, knowing that this journey into seclusion was just the beginning. The first few days were the hardest. Lena had just moved into the old mansion, a place that had been in her family for generations but had stood empty for years. The air was thick with dust and memories, and the silence was almost tangible, wrapping around her like a heavy blanket. The silence of the house was oppressive, a constant reminder of its emptiness and the lives that had once filled its rooms. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, weighing down on Lena like a physical burden. The silence seemed to amplify her loneliness and fears. She felt the weight of the house's history pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. Each creak of the floorboards, each groan of the old wood, seemed to echo through the empty halls, a reminder of the house's age and the secrets it held. Each sigh of the wind against the windows, each rattle of the panes sent a shiver down her spine. It was as if the house was alive, breathing and whispering in the dark, sent a jolt of fear through her, making her jump at every little sound. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that the house was aware of her presence. She busied herself with unpacking, trying to distract herself from the oppressive silence. She hoped that by filling the house with her belongings, she could bring some life back into its cold, empty rooms. Trying to bring some semblance of life back into the old mansion, she arranged her books and knickknacks on the shelves, hoping to make the place feel more like home. She aired out the rooms, dusted the furniture, and tried to banish the musty smell that seemed to cling to everything. She wanted to make the house her own, to erase the shadows of the past, and hung up some of her own paintings to cover the bare walls, hoping that the bright colors would chase away the gloom. But no matter how hard she tried, the house remained stubbornly silent and cold. But no matter how hard she tried, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. It was as if the house was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. Lena couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. She would often glance over her shoulder, half expecting to see a shadowy figure lurking in the corners. She would often feel a cold spot in certain areas of the house, a sudden drop in temperature that sent chills down her spine. It was as if the house itself was trying to communicate with her, to tell her something she couldn't quite understand. A sudden drop in temperature that sent chills down her spine. Objects would move slightly, as if nudged by an unseen hand. A vase shifted on a table, a book knocked off a shelf. A vase shifted on a table, a subtle movement that she couldn't explain. It was as if the house was trying to get her attention, to make her see something she was missing. A book knocked off a shelf, landing with a thud that echoed through the silent house. She would pick it up, her hands trembling, and place it back, only for it to fall again the next day. At first, she dismissed these occurrences as tricks of her imagination, her mind playing games with her in the silence. She told herself that it was just the house settling, that there was nothing to be afraid of, her mind playing games with her in the silence. But as the days went by, the strange happenings became harder to ignore. She began to feel like she was losing her grip on reality. But as the days turned into nights, the strange happenings grew more frequent, more brazen. It was as if the house was testing her, pushing her to see how much she could take. The strange happenings grew more frequent, more brazen. Objects would move on their own. Doors would creak open and shut, and she would hear faint whispers in the dead of night. She began to hear noises, faint at first, like the scratching of tiny claws against the walls. It was as if something was trying to get in, to break through the barriers she had put up. Like the scratching of tiny claws against the walls, the noises would grow louder and more insistent as the night wore on. She would lie in bed, her heart pounding, straining to hear where they were coming from. As the sun began its descent, casting long, eerie shadows across the estate, the noises would intensify. It was as if the house came alive at night, its true nature revealed in the darkness. Casting long, eerie shadows across the estate, the noises would intensify. The shadows seemed to move and shift, taking on shapes that made her heart race with fear. Lena would lie awake in bed, her heart pounding in her chest as the scratching sounds grew louder. She would clutch the blankets to her chest, her eyes wide with terror, unable to move. Her heart pounding in her chest. She would listen to the sounds, trying to convince herself that it was just her imagination. But deep down, she knew that something was very wrong. As the scratching sounds grew louder, seeming to come from right outside her bedroom door, she would hold her breath, waiting for the door to creak open and reveal whatever was lurking on the other side, seeming to come from right outside her bedroom door. She would stare at the door, her mind racing with fear and anticipation, wondering what she would do if it opened. The silence was no longer just unsettling, it was terrifying. One night, Lena was jolted awake by a sound she couldn't ignore. It was a low, guttural moan emanating from the depths of the house. Terror gripped her heart as the sound echoed through the silence, seeming to vibrate in her very bones. It was a sound that spoke of pain, of suffering, of something ancient and evil. Lena lay frozen in her bed, her mind racing, too afraid to even scream. The next morning she tried to rationalize the sound, blaming it on the old house settling, or perhaps an animal trapped in the walls. But deep down she knew that neither of those explanations felt right. The sound had been too human, too full of anguish, to be anything but unnatural. The house seemed to press in on her, its silence now filled with unseen menace. The scratching sounds intensified, spreading throughout the house as if something was trying to claw its way out from within the walls. They were followed by whispers, faint and indistinct, slithering through the air like venomous snakes. Lena couldn't make out the words, but the voices sent shivers down her spine. They were cold, devoid of any warmth or humanity, whispering secrets that were meant to remain hidden.